Before we get into today's episode, I'd like to give a quick shout out to my friend Sebastian, who made new channel art. You can find him at Twitter at Sebastian66966. Hello, everybody. It is Sunday, July 26, 2020. Welcome back to Texas Progressive. Now, today is going to be my plea to conservatives as to why you should want Donald Trump out of office. I think this show, well, I'd like to think this show is geared towards everybody, but I'm a progressive, and I think a lot of what I say is valuable to people in the progressive sphere. But today will be towards conservatives in particular because I know, especially in the state of Texas, there are a lot of people who identify as conservative because that's sort of the cultural and societal default when you're apolitical or if your parents were somewhat political or apolitical. So basically, I'm going to be outlining today all the reasons why Donald Trump is the exact opposite of what conservatives would want in office based on the things that conservatives find important uh, for candidates that they usually vote for. So the reason what caused me to want to make this today was everybody I think knows about the unmarked federal police who were deployed in Portland, Oregon, and who were later said to be deployed in Chicago, although we still haven't heard if they are deployed there. But if you haven't heard of this, essentially, Department of Homeland Security Secretary, maybe under the direction of Donald Trump, sent unmarked federal law enforcement to Portland, Oregon to, I guess, quell the rioting and protesting that was going on there. They arrested, it seemed like they singled out several people in crowds for not obvious reasons. Uh, when asked when the officers were asked to identify themselves, uh, they said nothing. They gave no reason for the arrest. They again were in unmarked vehicles. They themselves, all they had were patches that said police on them. It didn't say anything about Department of Homeland Security or Customs and Border Patrol or DEA or ATF or the several different federal law enforcement agencies that we know of. And according to reports of people who have been arrested or detained or what some lawyers and experts are calling kidnappings, they say that they are given, you have the right to be given a record of your arrest. You have the right to ask the officers to identify themselves, and you have the right to ask them why you are being arrested. Um, Through several independent reports of people who were arrested, they are taken sometimes to undisclosed locations with their faces covered, asked if they will waive their right to an attorney to some questions. Obviously, a lot of them, or all of them, said no. And then shortly after, they are either arrested on different charges, which is the minority of what seems to be happening, or they are just released completely with no record of their arrest and no reason for their arrest at all. So, I mean, that to me personally, in my professional, non-expert opinion, that sounds to me like a kidnapping, you know, through and through. Like it doesn't seem like there could be debate as to whether this was a lawful arrest when this is obviously not. So essentially, unmarked police are kidnapping people off the streets, which is something that a lot of conservatives should be concerned about, although you don't hear much about it. And I think that people who are genuinely conservative are disturbed by this, as I think anybody with, regardless of political affiliation or leanings, should be or would be. So before we get right into, I mean, that's obviously a reason why, that's obviously a reason on its own why conservatives should want Donald Trump out. But before we get into the other reasons, this is because this is still ongoing. The White House cited 40 U.S. Code 1315 as the reason for, or as the justification for sending in unmarked federal law enforcement. And again, if you read 40 U.S. Code 1315, it says nothing about allowing police to be unmarked. What it does say is that federal police officers can be deployed to protect federal buildings in anywhere in the United States where there are federal buildings or courthouses, or buildings being leased or rented by the federal government. But the thing about that, though, is a lot of these arrests are happening outside of the grounds of the courthouse, and so, but there is a provision in 40 U.S. Code 1315 that says federal police officers may extend their reach or extend their jurisdiction and arrest people and enforce state and federal laws in conjunction with local and state officials. So not on their own behest. They must get permission and cooperate with local law enforcement to leave the courthouse grounds and enforce other laws and make arrests outside of federal property, which is not happening. The mayor of Portland himself has asked these officers to leave. There are all federal troops, essentially what they are, to leave. There is no cooperation between or coordination between local law enforcement and these federal troops. So the 40 U.S. code 40 U.S. code 1315 on its own doesn't even justify what's going on here. So this should really be terrifying for everybody. And then again, Donald Trump said that they were going to deploy these officers to Chicago next because of course, that's the perfect dog whistle for racists out there who would want that to be the case. Although you don't really hear much about Chicago protesting. I mean, although every so often you hear about conservatives saying so many people died in Chicago over the weekend, and Dems are silent about it. It's a total dog whistle to send these people to Chicago, and I think that's pretty obvious to everybody. Okay, so now let's get right into the meat of this. So why should conservatives be against Donald Trump? First of all, he's an opportunist. He doesn't really believe in anything. He just says whatever's most politically convenient for him at the time. I think most people realize this, but let's go through some of the things that he does. So he does a moralistic appeal to conservatives, especially evangelicals, when he talked about the issue of abortion. So he was pro-life his entire life, essentially. Last time he was asked before the most recent time was in 2015 that he spoke on this. The last time before that was in the 90s when he said he was pro-life. So essentially his whole life he was pro-life, and I believe it was in 2015 he was asked his stance, and he said that one of the primary reasons he changed his mind is because one of his friends thought about getting an abortion, and then he met the child and the child was beautiful, and so then he changed his mind on abortion, which is I mean, if you believe that, like, okay, right? I don't think what I say today is going to be able to convince you, but that was what he said was one of the primary reasons. That's a direct quote, primary reasons to changing, because he personally knew somebody who almost got an abortion, which again, this totally disingenuous opportunist. This was in 2015, right when he announced he was going to run. So obviously he had to change his stances and be and maneuver the sort of political sphere in the best way possible. And he knew that taking this stance on abortion and just picking some random reason, it doesn't really matter. A lot of the times, I mean, even conservatives themselves will tell you that they don't really care if these people are genuine as long as they like push what conservatives want in the United States. I mean, and I guess you kind of have to deal with that on your own uh, internally, if that's justify that to yourself, essentially. He's also weaponized abortion. If you remember in his 4th of July speech on my last episode I was talking about, he said on his 4th of July speech in front of Mount Rushmore that all children born and unborn are made in the image of God. Again, total appeals to evangelicals and Christianity. He doesn't really believe any of this stuff. It's unclear whether he's actually a Christian, which is exactly what we're going to get to next. Again, he's weaponized Christianity in the way of saying, in the example I just gave right now, with all children born and unborn, which is a total dog whistle to conservatives, are made in the image of God. Uh, it's unclear whether he's actually a Christian, also, and I know. So to me personally, obviously, a politician's stance on abortion is important to me, but. I don't care if a politician is religious at all. Like, I don't think that should play a factor, or that doesn't play a factor for me personally as to whether I'm going to vote for this person. That I just don't care. But a lot of conservatives care about the religiosity of people they are voting for, and it's unclear that what's his name? Trump, right? Trump is actually a conservative. If you remember the photo op with the Bible where he dispersed peaceful protesters or federal law enforcement agents dispersed peaceful protesters with flashbangs, rubber bullets, and tear gas in front of the White House, so Trump could then walk over to a chapel near the White House holding a Bible very awkwardly, a Bible that he then admitted wasn't even his own Bible. So it was a total just photo op. To appeal to the evangelicals, and it was just, I mean, I think even a lot of evangelicals saw through that facade. I mean, the hardcore Trumpists uh, are gonna love what he does no matter what. But I think even some of the evangelicals saw like this is not genuine. The way he was holding the Bible was awkward. He said the Bible wasn't his. Uh, he only did it for the photo op. It didn't seem like it was a genuine religious thing. I think it was obvious to everyone that that was just an appeal to Christians without any actual, I guess, Christianity or evangelicism from his side. Um, yeah, when asked, I think this was also in 2015, when asked what his favorite passage from the Bible was, he said it was very personal to him and that he didn't want to talk about that sort of thing. And then he also mentioned that the Bible was his favorite book, only followed by Art of the Deal, which is a book, which was one of his books, which was released in 1986 or 87, that he himself didn't even write. Somebody else wrote it. So and that was one of his, I think, his most famous book, actually, which made him a common household name, Art of the Deal. Didn't even write it himself, again, like I said. Okay. Um, Another thing that conservatives hold dear uh, to themselves, their identity, and how they vote is the Constitution. You always see conservative politicians and conservative voters making appeals to the Constitution, saying they love the Constitution, or progressives or Democrats hate this country and the Constitution. So the Constitution is very important to conservative Republican voters. And Trump just has a complete, total, blatant disregard for the Constitution and the rule of law in the United States, although he also weaponizes the Constitution in similar way he does with Christianity to just appeal to, or not, I said weaponizes, sort of uses it as a prop to appeal to conservatives. And some of examples of that, I think everyone is aware of the oh man, the emoluments clause. I almost forgot what called it, the nepotism clause. The emoluments clause, which essentially prevents. I mean, although it's never really been enforced, it prevents the president from doing a lot of things actually. But one of the main things is from essentially profiting either himself personally or herself and the president's family from profiting off of the presidency. So that can include putting family members and friends in positions of power, promoting certain products, which we'll get into, and I think a lot of people know about that. So these are against the emoluments clause of the Constitution, and it's what we call nepotism, and it's running rampant in the Trump administration. So Ivanka Trump, the daughter of Donald Trump, who I don't know what her. I don't think she has any qualifications to be an advisor other than being the daughter of Donald Trump. She's actually a senior advisor at the White House. She's appeared with foreign leaders in several videos and uh, pictures, and they ignore her very often because they realize what is she doing here? Who is this person? Why is she relevant at all? And I think most people realize the only reason she is relevant is because she's the daughter of Trump. I mean, if Ivanka were not Trump's daughter, would she be in the same position she's in now? Same thing for Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump's husband. Uh, he spoke at I believe several. I mean, I know he did at one for sure, but I believe it was several COVID-19 press briefings. Remember when they used to have those on a daily basis? They're starting those back up. He spoke at one or at several of them, and it's like, what qualifications does Jared Kushner have? Is he a medical expert? Is he a virologist? What exactly is Jared Kushner's involvement here at the White House, especially when it comes to COVID-19? Would Jared Kushner be in the same position he is right now if he weren't married, if he weren't the son-in-law of Donald Trump? Very doubtful. He's also, this was a few months back, he was put in charge of resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which I mean, we've had so much time off the past few months. You'd think he would have solved it by now, but it seems like he's made no progress on that. But and I mean, the primary reason why this is wrong again is this is nepotism. Why is Jared Kushner being put in charge of the talks between Israel and Palestine and creating some sort of solution? What I mean, he's Jewish, right? Maybe that's maybe if he were not married to Ivanka, he would still be in charge of this simply on the fact that he's Jewish. No, I'm joking. Obviously, this is just nepotism. This is just more filling the swamp, although Trump promised to drain the swamp. And I know, again, this is my appeal to conservatives. Apart from this being a blatant disregard for the Constitution, I think uh, a Christian person would not do something like this, right? They wouldn't first claim to want to drain the swamp during their campaign. I think a lot of conservatives remember that. I think that was a big appeal for conservatives that people on both sides of the political spectrum in the United States recognize that what we have is a class of politicians, or not necessarily, a class of people in the United States who are the ruling class and who are the political class. Um, and they go in there sometimes making six figures or less and come out, or sometimes making five figures and come out making six figures, sometimes making six figures, coming out with seven figures at the end of your tenure. I think most people recognize this, and I think most people have a problem with that. And Trump promised he was going to drain the swamp, but I mean, not only did he give positions to Ivanka and Jared, but also Donald Trump Jr. has been speaking very often. The Alex Azar is a former the Department of Health and Human Services secretary, is a former lobbyist for insurance companies. So this whole draining the swamp thing. Again, this isn't a Christians very hold to high regard, or I guess lying is a sin. Okay, I mean, there's no other way to say it. Lying is a sin, and this is a blatant lie. This is something, well, and this is something that you should have seen through from the very beginning, something that I and other people saw through. And maybe they, being Christians, were hoping that this wouldn't be the case, but now we see that it is the case, that he's filling the swamp. He said he was going to drain it, but here he is. Here we are. Also, final thing on nepotism, like I said earlier, like I alluded to, the promotion or endorsement of products, the emoluments clause pro- strictly prohibits the endorsement of any product. And if you've seen over the past few days, Trump and Ivanka have been openly promoting Goya products because the CEO, I believe, of Goya is a vocal Trump supporter. And this is an obvious violation of the emoluments clause. I mean, it's just in plain English. The president or those around him or his family may not endorse any products. That's not the exact verbiage, but it's essentially something like that. And here we are. They're endorsing Goya. They're posting pictures. They're saying, "I love Goya." And it's also an appeal to Hispanic voters, but I guess that doesn't really matter much to conservatives. Uh, and it's disingenuous. Okay, next, the Second Amendment. Conservatives love their Second Amendment, although, I mean, a lot of the times they don't realize that the very first sentence goes, uh, a well regulated militia necessary for the protection of a free state, which has nothing to do with personal ownership of firearms. But then the next sentence is, or the next half of the sentence is, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people choose to ignore that first part. A regulated militia necessary for the protection of a free state. I mean, a lot of people ignore that part. That's neither here nor there in discussing today. But Trump himself has a total, conservatives hold this dearly, and Trump has a total blatant disregard for the Constitution. He said in 2018, I think following either a string of mass shootings or some sort of horrible mass shooting. I mean, it was hard for me to find exactly what the impetus to this was, because sadly in the United States we have so many mass shootings. But if my memory serves me correctly, there was some sort of mass single event that happened that led to some talks in 2018 about how can we curb gun deaths. And Trump suggested to take the guns away from people first, people suspected of being mentally unstable, and then we have due process. I'm not twisting his words at all. That is almost literally what he says. He said, "I think we should take the guns first, and then we have due process," which is obvious. I mean, this isn't necessarily a violation of the Second Amendment. I mean, this is a violation of property rights, and I guess it is a violation of the Second Amendment because you are unlawfully disarming a citizen, and it's obviously unlawful when he says, "Let's disarm them first or take away their arms, and then we can have due process." That's not how things work in this country. We have due process for any sort of action taken by police. If somebody is suspected of being mentally unstable, we need to get a warrant for that person's property to be seized. It's not just that the government has total authority over the, and again, this is something that conservatives are against. They're against a tyrannical government denying people due process, taking their guns. They're always afraid of when the man comes knocking at your door. Well, that's exactly what Donald Trump suggested. And I think this shows us a few things. Firstly, that Donald Trump knows nothing about the Constitution. I think that was obvious, and I mentioned that before, and knows nothing about the Second Amendment and due process in particular. But I think this also shows us that also he's an opportunist, like I said, so he just says whatever sounds nice to him in the beginning, or whatever sounds nice to him in the moment. But it shows us that he doesn't understand and he's not serious. And I'm sure if somebody were to explain to him, "Hey, this is why we can't do that," or "why what you just suggested is totally illegal," I'm sure that he would say, or I'm sure that he would quickly change his mind then. But it shows that he doesn't believe in anything. He's just willing to do whatever he thinks is the most politically convenient thing at the time. And especially when it comes to the Second Amendment, I think a lot of conservatives should be afraid. It's like, does he really understand the implications of the Second Amendment? Does he understand why it's important? Does he understand why due process is important for people? And then I think this sort of goes without saying, but if Obama had suggested, "Hey, how about we take away people's guns first, and then we can talk about having due process for them?" I mean, conservatives, it would have been weeks of coverage on Fox News, nonstop. And rightfully so, right? But I think even conservatives these days, when they heard Trump say that, there wasn't nonstop coverage and there wasn't the sort of outrage that there would have been if it were Obama, because even conservatives understand to an extent this is not a serious person. Trump is not a serious guy. He really doesn't know much. He talks out of his behind, right? Most of the time, and he just says whatever he wants. So they don't take him seriously. And Obama, even if conservatives didn't like him before, they recognize, even if subconsciously, they recognize that Obama is a serious person. He is a professional person. What the things he says should be taken seriously, because he knows what he's saying. He's saying he understands the implications of what he's saying. Trump has no idea, and I think even his followers recognize that to an extent, that he's not serious. He's not a serious person. He doesn't really believe anything. So that's why there was no outrage about this, because they're like, well, who cares? He just says things sometimes. And okay, well, let me mention this. That's not a good thing, right? That we want a president who we know is going to be saying what they mean and believing in what they say, and have what they say come from a principled standpoint. I think everybody should want that regardless of political affiliation. So we don't want a president who we know just says things sometimes and he doesn't know what he's talking about. States' rights. States' rights is a very important thing for conservatives out there. And as I mentioned at the opening of this, Trump has a disregard or lack of understanding for what states' rights is or implies. 40 U.S. Code 1315 prevents federal officers from arresting people off the property of federal buildings, again, if they are not in coordination with local law enforcement. The mayor of Portland, Oregon, asked federal agents to leave. He does not want to cooperate with them, and they are still there. That is a violation of states' rights. I mean, where are the Confederate flag waving patriots during all of this? Where are all the states' rights people during when people in the states are saying, "Hey, we don't want federal officers here"? Where are they? And I think, and maybe they're just silent, at home because they realize that coming out against this will be bad for their movement. But I'm speaking to principled people right now, principled, smart conservatives out there. There are some of you, and I hope you watch this show. Recognize that this is a total violation. I realize that you admitting this will weaken your movement, but if you're truly principled in the way that you claim to be, it shouldn't matter. And you should call this out, and you should recognize that this is wrong and this is a total violation of what this country was founded on and the Constitution. Um, and obviously, Trump has appealed. He has championed states' rights in the past and the Confederacy, or not directly, obviously, because that would be political suicide, but he has made appeals to these types of people in the past. Yet in policy, here he is violating states' rights. So again, he's disingenuous even in his appeals and what he actually believes in. Uh, Final thing. This was in 2019, I believe it was. I don't write down the dates for this stuff, but I do know these things happen. And if anybody pushes me on these or questions me, I know that I can find these things. I believe this was in 2019. This was mid 2019 during peace talks with North Korea. A this It wasn't necessarily an off the record interview, but several times during the interview, Trump asked to go off the record, and the interview was not videoed, and I believe it was by Time Magazine. And it was during, again, like I said, it was during peace talks with North Korea, and he had a letter. Trump had a letter from North Korea about establishing peace, and a journalist took a photo of the letter, and Trump immediately snapped at him. He's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "You know, I could have you arrested." He's like, "Article 2 of the Constitution uh, says I can do whatever I want." He literally said Article 2 of the Constitution says the president can do whatever he wants, which is not true. And I think most people realize that. He's weaponizing the Constitution for his own political gain. He says he can do whatever he wants, which is exactly what conservatives should be afraid of: a tyrannical and too strong centralized government, centralized federal government. And he's not only has he threatened to arrest journalists, which is almost unthinkable in well if you well it's not unthinkable to a lot of leftist progressives in the United States, but to a lot of the people who have convinced themselves of this whole great American experiment and how great and freedom loving America is, it should be almost unthinkable uh, that a president in apparently the land of the free, home of the brave, what do they call him, the leader of the free world, is threatening to imprison journalists during an interview for taking a picture. I mean, it sounds like something that happens in another country where journalists are executed, right? It's not, we value our freedoms here under the First Amendment, especially the freedom of the press, and this should have set off so many alarms for conservatives, but I think it did for a few. Uh, Not only that, but he's also antagonized the media in the past. He's during his press conference several times, as opposed to asking. And I, again, if you press me on this, well, actually, I encourage you to if you're curious about specifics, ask me, DM me about this. He has on several occasions called journalists fake news to their face, either at press conferences or in one-on-one interviews, instead of answering the actual question. He says, "You're fake news." That's a nasty question when it's an actually fair question on something that he just doesn't want to talk about. He says, "You should be ashamed of yourself," he said several times. Uh, he's created antagonisms between the media, between the free press that we so much value in the United States. He has created suspicion and animosity towards the media, which is the first step. I mean, I was gonna make today's episode about fascism, but I thought, it really doesn't matter what we call it. Let's just call out the specifics and explain why they're bad. I can call it fascism, I can call it authoritarianism, I can call it what I want. It doesn't matter, right? Let's talk about what he's doing and why it's wrong. I need to stop focusing on the whole labeling these things to try to trigger emotional responses. But the first steps in fascism are creating animosity towards the media. creating a suspicion of people on the outside of your own political or a skepticism, also like a radical skepticism of those outside of your political sphere. So whether that be people of other religions or the media, these are all things we've seen in the past that have led to fascistic rule in certain countries. Okay, so now realizing all of this, I hope conservatives out there realize that Trump is completely antithetical to everything they believe, everything that they supposedly stand for, and that their politicians, Republican conservative politicians, stand for. He's total blatant disregard for everything the United States uh, and everything the United States is founded on, and what conservatives believe and push for in the United States. So, some important things to keep in mind. I hope I've convinced you. If I have not, please let me know. Some important things to keep in mind for voting. October 5th is the last day to register for the general election. Early voting starts on October 19th and ends on October 30th. And the last day to register for a mail in application is October 23rd. As of the filming of this, July 26th, um, Texas has not announced any plans to allow uh, people who don't need an absentee ballot to apply for an absentee ballot. So the qualifications to apply for an absentee ballot are you have to be 65 or older. You have to either you are not going to be in the county where you vote in on voting day. You can apply for a mail-in ballot. You have some sort of disability. Excuse me. You have some sort of disability that prevents you from voting on election day, so you can apply for a mail-in ballot that way. And I forgot the fourth reason, but essentially, unless there's some sort of extenuating circumstance, it's not very likely that most people will need to apply for mail-in voting. Uh, I will keep you guys updated on that. I hope that it might be too late. I'm not too caught up on this legislatively, but I will keep you guys caught up in case they decide to expand absentee ballots registration to everybody. Um, because that's definitely what we need right now in the middle of a pandemic. It's totally unconscionable to think that our governments, our state governments, are not allowing people to register uh, for absentee ballots unless they qualify for one. It's just it's just almost unthinkable, and it's completely. I mean, aside from this was my appeal to conservatives to vote for Biden, but we also need to get Greg Abbott out of here. I mean, absolutely, just a mouthpiece and a pawn for Donald Trump. Just horrible. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching today. I hope I convinced some of you. Some of you, if I did, let me know. If I didn't, also let me know. I'd like to discuss with you further on these topics. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.